All right. Assalamu alaikum. Imam Khalid, how you doing?
Alaikum salam rahmatullah. Alhamdulillah, I'm doing very good, Brother Musab. How are you this evening?
Doing all right, can't complain. Uh, it's been a eventful time since the last time that we got on here and spoke.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we celebrated another. Well, I don't know if you celebrated, but Independence Day, independence of this country. Um,
Mm.
what's your do you typically celebrate July 4th or?
No, maybe I'm missing something. Why would I? No, I typically don't celebrate because, as far as people of African descent, it was nothing to celebrate on July 4th, 1776.
Okay, Juneteenth, right? Last month,
Mm-hmm.
Warrior Speed. Okay, alhamdulillah. And then there was also, I know that you spent some time in DC and had a background in political science. So some of these Supreme Court rulings. I'm just wondering, what's your take on these? What's your take on the affirmative action ruling? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think it's very sad. It's a sad commentary on this nation and Supreme Court specifically that, um, after after the progress that had been made in trying to level the playing field by allowing folks who would normally not be able to get into some of these prestigious universities to reverse that process now and just snatch the rug from under people. I think it may be a boom for HBCUs, and in many instances, they will probably have to step up their game a little bit to accommodate some of the students that they will be getting. But um, so, I mean, there's good that comes out of everything, but the decision by the Supreme Court is, to me, is kind of ludicrous at this point.
I heard it was this narrative that's been going on and it's a discussion that I've seen you participate in often. Um,
Hmm.
I think I saw it on like NBC. The former, she was I want to say press secretary for Biden, the first one. Now she's on NBC, and so she was covering this story. This whole situation where parents are making demands about the curriculum that their kids are being taught with respect to gender identity and sexuality and that type of stuff. And a lot of Muslims have been very vocal in saying that we want to have the option to say, no, this stuff you're not going to teach my kid. This stuff is okay.
Right.
And in some of these areas, particularly, I think Maryland and Michigan, some of these Muslim parent groups have come together with these Christian parent groups. And so this particular journalist, she was saying that this is a move by the GOP, by the right wing, to recruit the Muslim community as voters. And she said recruit. And then in some other discussions, I even heard where people talked about, hey, immigrant Muslims supported Bush before 9/11. Before 9/11, most immigrant Muslims were voting Republican just because that's where some of the values aligned. What what's your take on all this? You've seen before immigrant Muslims were a voting group in America, and then when they became a voting group in America, and now and then post 9/11, and how does that work with African American Muslims? Like, what's the I don't want to generalize or ask you to generalize, but based on your anecdotal experience, where do Muslims fall?
Yeah. I think oftentimes when it comes to the political participation, we fall on our face. And unfortunately, the Muslim community, as I've observed over the years, have gone from playing Rip Van Winkle and just sleeping on the sidewalk when it came to electoral politics to just jumping in and skipping the most important element, in my humble opinion, when one goes to cast a ballot, and that's political education. The Muslim community in this country has been very reactive and reactionary, even from just on issues, just running from one side to the other. My humble opinion is that at some particular point, the Muslim community has to mature to recognize that this political system is almost, when we talk about party affiliation, is actually just two wings of the same bird. And when we can accept this just for a moment, then we would understand that we have to identify, have an agenda as Muslims. What is best for the Muslim community, and not just run from one party to the next. And this is what we're doing now. I think the LGBT QIA issue is one that Muslims now are saying that this is the reason why we're all back in the Republican Party. We never should have left. Look at what they're doing. But I think it's when I say it's two wings of the same bird, we have to look at, okay, well, what are we embracing now? We Muslims are definitely against homosexuality, and the Quran and the Sunnah mandate this, but by just wholeheartedly going to the Republican Party as it exists today in this country, are we saying that we're for white nationalism? Are we for white supremacist rule? Are we for reactionary Supreme Court decisions that have been manipulated through a process of putting these right wing judges on the bench who are all Republican? So at some point, and my personal experience with the electoral process, and I have to admit that the entire time I was had as part of my major political science, I never registered to vote. My political participation was on a different kind of level. Uh, I wanted to enter the political process through a different door, and that's one way to put it. And so the entire time for 10 years I lived in D.C., I never registered to vote because I didn't see that as a effective avenue to try to bring about the changes I wanted to see. It was only after I moved back to North Carolina, and I would never tell anybody this because people, would, how in the world could you not be a registered voter? But when I moved back to North Carolina, I registered to vote. And that was primarily because the avenues and options for participation and the kinds of advocacy and protests and demonstrations and other things that I was involved in DC uh, weren't available. And so I knew I had to do something. And so I registered to vote. But I've always, even after registering to vote, at one point I was the North Carolina co-chair for the National Independent Black Political Party. And, so I've always had a mindset of trying to not just go with the familiar and the low hanging fruit, but to try to uh, be a part of something to try to change and bring about more equity, even in the political process. But I will say this, Masab, what as an adult, as a very mature adult at this point, what I recognize is that no human being would put in as much effort as being put in to disenfranchise African American voters were there not something to this. I mean, they demonstrate, those who are trying to, on whatever level, the gerrymandering and all these other things, uh, there's too much effort being put into that process for us to ignore the electoral process itself. There's something there. I'm not by no means discouraging. Even when wasn't registered, I didn't discourage anyone from doing that. It was just find your level of participation. But now I think the Muslims community in the United States, we have to grow up. We got to put our big boy pants on and make decisions not based on convenience and just easy decisions. But if we're not ready to start looking at a Muslim political party, or not ready to start endorsing alternative means of political participation, then at least don't wholesalely just dump your votes in a particular party. At least be selective, not based on the party of individuals. Like in North Carolina, in order to vote in the primaries, you have to register from one party or the other, or as an independent. If you're independent, you can't vote in the primaries for individuals who are going to make it out into the general election. So I just think we have to um, collectively show a greater political sense of maturity than what we've done up to this point.
So in honor of you know or in observance of this theme, I thought it might be good to since this is Untold Stories of Islam in America. I thought, I pulled up some some
I'm
pictures.
holding my breath. I'm holding my breath. I don't know what's about to happen here.
you you just let me know if I just need to move on because I got several,
Right.
right? But
Okay. Okay.
I'm gonna show you a picture, and you have to tell
Okay.
us about the first time the first time that you met this person
Oh
or
boy.
were about to meet this person. So
Okay. Okay.
let's see.
Oh boy. Oh, Jimmy Carter. You know, uh, in my college years, and after I had graduated from college, uh, I was at times a very frequent speaker, even on the platform, standing in Lafayette Park, denouncing whoever was the president. And I was consistent in that behavior even when Jimmy Carter was elected president of the United States. I would be with other groups and they would ask me to speak, and I would denounce policies. But as a Muslim, I honed in on Carter's specific policies that affected and impacted the Muslim community, as well as just other things. So, Carter, as we know, was the president who was in place when the Iran Contra situation, I'm sorry, not Iran Contra, when the Iranian students took over the American embassy in Tehran. And so Carter was got in a warmonger mode, and we're gonna go back and we're gonna send people to rescue the hostages and all like that. So that's the backdrop to what I'm about to say about Jimmy Carter. In 1979, and this was after I had moved uh, and the Islamic Party had shifted its headquarters from DC to, we were out in Connally, Georgia, right outside of Atlanta. I received a 6 or 7 page Western Union telegram. Of course, this is before Messenger and uh, you know texting and all this other kind of the access that we have for communication was not available then to the general public. And so I received a Western Union telegram inviting me to be a guest of basically I was invited, and the telegram was signed Committee of Americans for Canal Treaties Incorporated. And when I got the telegram, I was really shocked. I thought some of my friends were playing an expensive joke on me, because what it was doing, it invited me to be to come to the International Inn, uh, International Hotel. I think it may not be the exact name, but it was at 14th and um, the Circle there on 14th Street, roundabout on 14th. It wasn't DuPont Circle. I can't remember the name of it now. But there was a hotel there called International Hotel. And there was a meeting of these folks, the Committee of Americans for Canal Treaties Incorporated. And what they were trying to do, and what their stated purpose was, to develop grassroots support for the U.S. government turning over the Panama Canal back to Panama in 1999, I think was the year that they were going to turn it over. So there was a long runway from 1977, I think it was 1977 until 1999. So anyway, I got this letter and they said that after you meet with these folks and they're trying to get this grassroots support, then you would be bused to the White House to meet President Jimmy Carter. So it said, okay, send in your, information, background information, so we can do a background check. So I started thinking, I said, now, if you're finding me in this remote part of Georgia outside of Atlanta, you already know my background. I mean, what is this about? I was a little dumbfounded by it. So I said, well, let me play along with this. So I sent my information back. I guess they did their security check and all this stuff. So I go to this gathering and they were talking about these are grassroots people. And I looked at and I identified the black folks who were in this large gathering. They're talking about the canal treaties. And during one of the breaks, I was going around just to the black folks trying to figure out what did they do. And so I quickly came to the conclusion, if these folks are grassroots, I must be the dirt up under the ground, because you had the person who was head of maybe Department of Social Services in Cleveland, Ohio. You had all these folks who were government folks in their respective cities, and here I am, the agitator, the person denouncing everything, and what was I doing there? So to make the story a little shorter, because it's a lot of different elements to it, but I'll get right to why you're putting this picture in front of me right now. So they bust us over. In the White House. We go through about 3 security checks, and at each point, I'm thinking they're going to stop me. They're not going to let this crazy dude up in there. But I got through each one of the checks, and we've eventually taken into this big, huge, like reception hall. And I'm standing there and I'm saying, I'm a young guy at that particular time, and I'm saying this is 1977, and I'm saying, you know, how can I be in here with this crowd? And there was nothing wrong with the people, but my politics are so different. I've stood in Lafayette Park across the street from the White House denouncing this man. So my conscience uh, was really bothering me, and I felt that I had to do something. Otherwise, I would feel like I was being a hypocrite. Now, this might sound really, really crazy, even as I say it now. But when Jimmy Carter came into the room, I was standing there with all this angst. I couldn't figure out what I was going to do. And he was going around the room on one side and coming around. He started on the side where I was standing, and he would shake his hand, extend his hand and say, "Hi there, I'm Jimmy Carter. Thank you for coming." He would shake your hand. So when he got to me, it was just too much for me to handle. And so when he said, "Hi, I'm Jimmy Carter. Thanks for coming," and extended his hand, I literally put my hands behind my back and just stood there. And I didn't recognize that the people who were around him, they were so smooth in what they were doing. I didn't even think that these were probably Secret Service protecting the president of the United States. They surrounded me. Appeared like they jumped out of the floor like mushrooms coming up in the grass or something. And they had me surrounded. Carter didn't miss a beat. He just kept moving on in his good Southern slow way. And after he had gotten a certain distance from me, my now new friends who were protecting me, um, you know, I guess for myself, moved out of the way, and he continued to go around the room. And after that, we were bus back to the hotel. So I messed it up. I had an opportunity to just, this is my big break. I'm given the opportunity. You can go in big long places and you just act like you got some sense. And I blew it. I blew it on that front, but everything else that I've done in my life, I don't regret that.
So you talked about how there was this conflict with the U.S. and Iran, and Jimmy Carter on one side. So you could probably imagine which picture I have next. I'm playing with you. I'm joking.
Oh no,
I'm not
man.
gonna do
Oh,
that.
oh, okay. Thank you.
I'm not gonna do that. No.
Okay.
Uh, but
Okay.
but I think I think you'll like the next picture that I show. There we go. The
Okay.
first time
Okay.
that you met this gentleman.
Uh-huh. Um, the first time I actually met him was in probably about 1978 or 9. Um, and as I said, at that particular point, the Islamic Party had shifted its headquarters uh, to Georgia, right outside to Atlanta, um, right outside of Atlanta, Georgia. And Imam Jamil Abdullah El Amin was running. Let me back up one second. When Imam Jamil was um, was arrested and was in state prison in New York, the Amir of the Islamic Party, Muzaffar Hamid, instructed me to write Imam Jamil to contact him and try to establish a line of communication with him. And so I wrote him, and when I eventually met Imam Jamil, I referenced that, but he said, "Well, I never got it. I had just recently left. By the time you sent that letter, he was out. He was back on the street. He was in Georgia, in Atlanta." And so Imam Jamil, in the community where the masjid was established, and he had a community store there. And at that particular time, I was a union organizer in the late 1970s. And I used to travel from North Carolina. Uh, our regional office was in Atlanta, and I would stop through that office um, on Monday mornings or Tuesday, whenever I would, make my way back further south. And on one of my early stops in Atlanta, I went over to the West End, and it was in the store that I first met Imam Jamil. And the conversations that we had initially were, he was I felt very reserved, understandably reserved. He didn't know me from, a rock out on the sidewalk or something. And, I'm overwhelmed emotionally in a way, meeting the person who I tried to model and emulate. Even when I was in high school, I've worn glasses for most of my life, but then I started wearing my sunglasses, my medicated sunglasses all the time. So I was walking around with black shades, and I started growing my afro as much as my parents would allow, because they had a limit for how much hair I could have on my head while I was still living in their house. But so I had emulated Imam Jamil. I tried to in a number of ways. Uh, but as I said, at first he was very reserved. But as time went on, and I started meeting people in Southern Alabama, and in particular, because I did a lot of work in Alabama, in the Black Belt counties and all. And I found that almost everywhere I went, when I said that, I didn't say I was from Connolly, I would say I was from Atlanta. And the people in the community would always ask me, "Do you know H. Rap Brown? Have you met H. Rap Brown?" And so after I was able to meet Imam Jamil, I would say, "Yes, I know H. Rap Brown." And without exception, the persons who asked me, "Did I know Imam Jamil?" characterized him as being the most courageous human being that they had ever met in their life. And that was saying a lot. And they said about Imam Jamil was that he showed no fear whatsoever, that he was completely fearless. Now, this Imam Jamil uh, was organizing, he and Snick and others who were doing this kind of organizing in the Deep South, voter registration and a lot of other things, were doing this under some of the most um, uh, death defying kind of circumstances. I mean, you had folks who were literally had been lynched in some of these areas, black folks who had been just shot for trying to register to vote, and houses burnt down, and all of these kinds of things. Now, here's Imam Jamil and those who were with him in SNCC organizing in these areas and standing up to the racists and the terrorists, these white Christian nationalist terrorists that were doing their thing at this point. So eventually, um, I ran across a sheriff in uh, Utah County, Georgia, in Alabama. I'm sorry, and his name was Gilmore. And he was just going on and on and on about H. Rap Brown, and he helped give me my manhood and all like this. So that next time when I went to see Imam Jamil, I asked, did he know Sheriff Gilmore? And that was almost like the aha moment for Imam Jamil. And with that, he started opening up to me and not treating me like, who is this dude, coming here talking to me and this kind of thing, and trying to engage me in conversation. And it was from that moment that I think he felt a little more comfortable with me, because I was able to talk about these people that he had been working with and this kind of thing. And so when Imam Jamil was, I don't want to, I'm sorry to just keep going on and on, but when Imam Jamil was arrested, and in 1995, the police, because of the work that was being done in that Southwest community where Imam Jamil was, that was a big drug open market spot in Atlanta, Georgia. And under the leadership of Imam Jamil, they cleaned that neighborhood up. They really literally cleaned the neighborhood up. Kids were able to play on the playground, and old people would walk in the neighborhoods. It was just an amazing transformation. And so Imam Jamil, as I said, when he was arrested in 2000, excuse me, in 2001, I think it was, for shooting this deputy and shooting two, one died from Cobb County. Um, when Imam Jamil was in Cobb County um, jail before he was brought to Atlanta, I visited him in the jail, I think a couple of times when he was in Cobb County, before they even brought him back to Atlanta. And um, it was there that he gave me his signature, that I heard for the first time his signature greeting. Uh, you know, do you need anything? Can I do anything for you? Now here it is. I'm sitting here looking at this brother behind this thick glass where you could hardly even see this thick, smoky petition. And I could barely make out his features. And he's asking me, is there anything I could do? And I was looking, peering through that glass, and I'm saying, is he serious? I mean, is this, because he has a good sense of humor. So I'm wondering whether he's joking with me. But I came to find out over the years that this is what he says. And he's sincere about that. And all of the years he's been incarcerated, brothers and sisters will tell you, if you're visiting or you're writing, this is what he's going to say. He's genuine about, what is it can I do? He wants to be a benefit to even those who are trying to assist him in the worst of conditions. Like the Prophet ﷺ, the best of you is the one who's most beneficial to the people. And say that Imam Jamil, before Allah guided him to Islam, was most beneficial to the people of African descent, the struggling people of African descent in the worst of social conditions. Allah had given him the courage to do what was necessary to be beneficial in the worst of circumstances. And then, so I'm gonna shut up, but I really pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opens those gates for Imam Jamil to return him to his family and to the community. He's given almost his entire life for the betterment of trying to better the conditions and the individual lives of people in this country, particularly uh, people of African descent, and as a Muslim leader, everybody who was oppressed.
You know, I think this connects to last time we met on here. We discussed a gentleman from a brother from Trinidad who has passed, Imam Yassin Abu Bakr. May Allah have mercy on him.
I mean,
And there was a point about him that I think is directly connected to, or a trait that he had that directly connects to the point that you just made about Imam Jamil,
mhm,
particularly as it regards to the people who you were working with in Alabama, how just general people, common people, how they regarded this man as courageous and someone who fought for them. Very similar to in Trinidad, the way that Imam Yassin was perceived. And,
mhm,
um, last time I mentioned that there was a very famous calypso singer who was very much admired Imam Yassin in Trinidad and said that this was a man who was fighting for the people, and he was a Muslim. And now, in Imam Jamil, I remember there was a video that I saw. It was an interview by a guy who's from New York, Felipe Luciano. Are you familiar with him?
yes, yes, absolutely.
Have you met him too?
I've met Felipe. I haven't had a lot of interaction with him, but I had the benefit of meeting him in New York a number of years ago.
He had an interview, a very because I know he was he's Puerto Rican, so he was part of the Young Lords and the Black Panthers. But he talked about
I
he
saw
went
that
to
interview.
Louis. He went to Louisiana
I
with
saw
Imam
that.
Jamil,
Right,
and I think his exact words were, I mean, clearly he didn't have to say it. He admired this guy so much for
right,
his courage and his compassion. But I remember he said, if he never went to jail, I'd be a Muslim, right?
right,
So
right. That's right.
so
That's right.
as so when we look at these figures who are uh, very regarded in the community as the as one as fierce and courageous, and second as representatives for the or advocates, warriors for the rights of the marginalized and the oppressed. When those people become Muslim, what is the impact from a Dawa perspective on that segment of the community that they are fighting for, or the overall community? What does it do for our
Yeah,
Dawa?
yeah, that's an excellent question. You know, the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him, has said that one of his du'as, one of his consistent prayers was to asking Allah for certain things. And one is to remove any cowardice that may be in my heart. Just save me from cowardice. Because in order to take a stand on behalf of the oppressed, the wretched of the earth, you have to have courage to do that. You can't be afraid of your shadow. It doesn't mean that every Muslim has to be an Imam Jamil, of course not. But every Muslim has to exhibit courage in our daily interactions, especially as it relates to calling for social justice. Now, as far as the dawah goes, I know beyond a shadow of a doubt within my lifetime with, to me, the Muslim that Allah has raised in this country, that myself and millions of other Muslims and non-Muslims have utmost respect for, is Malcolm X, El Hajj Malik Al Shabazz. And that quality of fearlessness is something that attracted others to Malcolm when he was in the Nation of Islam, but it also attracted those once Allah guided him to true Islam. And so the element of having an individual, man or woman, brother or sister, being courageous to speak a word of truth, it doesn't mean you have to stand like a nut like I did with Jimmy Carter, a guest in his house, and you put your hands behind your back. But at least uh, have the courage to take a stand, whether it goes against what the mainstream is doing, no matter how beneficial it may be to us as individuals. We have to take a stand for Islam and for what is right. And Imam Jamil and Imam Yassin Abu Bakr, a brother who, you and I had discussed before Allah took his soul, uh, that you would like to meet him. And I told you that, yeah, that's a trip we can take. I had met Imam Yassin in London at a Hajj conference in 1988, I think it was. And when I met him, I came back. I don't know if I've said this before, but when I came back, I told people I had just met the person who's either going to be the next prime minister of Trinidad, or it's going to be another fate, waiting for him, because he just exuded, his just essence of him was that of, I'm taking a stand for what I believe is correct, and I'm not going to compromise on this. So from a Dow and this a similar impact with Imam Yassin Abu Bakr in Trinidad. It, uh, Interestingly enough, Imam Yassin used to be a police officer in Trinidad. And when he gained a lot of notoriety, and people were taking Shahada in the masjid where he was the Imam, literally it would be 20 or 30 people from the community taking Shahada every single Friday under his leadership. And and so the police and others start honing in on him. We better watch this guy. Something is really going on. And the way Allah would have it, Imam Yassin ended up marrying the police chief there in Trinidad. And so, only Allah can create those kinds of relationships and connections. But I say all this to say that whether we're talking about Imam Jamil Al-Amin, whether you're talking about whether we're talking about Malcolm, uh, um, Malik Shabazz, whether we're talking about, um, you know, any other figure who is taking a straightforward position in presenting their understanding of Islam and relating that not to just the afterlife, but how this is a liberating force for us right here on this earth. I've found that it's one of the best um, dawah expressions and tools to use in presenting Islam in this manner for people who are being oppressed, struggling people. Uh, uh, it's just open dawah. It's just an open invitation to be liberated through Islam.
Yeah, I think a lot of times these dawah classes and workshops, they focus on the on like the debate and the points that you need to hammer home. Um, but I think with the point that you just made, I think it's important for us to consider that different communities need to be addressed differently. And I think that most one of the areas where I don't want to say low hanging fruit, um, when talking about marginalized or oppressed communities, and I'm not talking about communities that claim to be oppressed. I'm talking about,
Right.
these communities that are actually in the living below the poverty line, that their children are being targeted by the mass incarceration system that exists all over the country. I don't want to call them low hanging fruit, but I do want to recognize the point that you just made, that when we do take our services into that community and take our compassion into that community, and we present them a message of Islam that is coupled with our service to them, um, then we end up seeing those situations like the ones you described, where Imam Yasin would have on a given Friday 20 to 30 shahadas. And I'm sure that that was typical in Imam Jamil's masjid and your masjid in North Carolina, is that when we're serving the community and Allah is softening their hearts, then they will be more receptive to the message. And I feel like that's one of the areas where we as a Muslim community, as we've grown in numbers and financially, um, and a lot of the Muslim community has moved up the ranks on the economic ladder. I feel like that's one of those areas that we've kind of forgotten, these were the types of discussions that led to the formation of Mabel, right? Muslim Alliance for Black Lives, is returning to
Right.
those communities because that's where Islam came from. What would you say to like the average Muslim in America who's not familiar with the presence of Islam in those communities? What is Islam in a community like that, in the inner city or in the hood?
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I think that when we contextualize the practice of Islam across America, um, we find that there are more things, and this may sound strange, especially coming from me, but we'll find more similarities than differences between how Islam is practiced and understood in the inner cities as a and especially in inner city communities that are struggling, just just survival type things, as compared to what's going on in suburban areas and in more affluent areas where the Muslims are congregated. Allah as one God and the master of the day of judgment is worshiped in both places. It's not like what is the Islam that has been practiced in the inner cities is something that is um, foreign to the teachings of Islam or the practice of Islam. And I think what happens oftentimes is that uh, there's a um, I don't want to be harsh in what I'm saying, so I'm trying to pick my words carefully. But I think sometimes um, there is a tendency on the part of those who have not um, gone through some of the struggles, just day to day survival struggles, or being targeted because of their race or ethnicity and this kind of thing, in the way that people of African descent have and Latinos have in these inner city communities. There's a tendency to sometimes look at their Islam as not being legitimate enough, as if they're practicing some kind of counterfeit Islam. And so, no matter how long they may be Muslim, that the kind of regard that would be given to someone else who said that they've been Muslim and they've done these things, that nobody's looking for, praise or anything just simply because of our Shahada. But what I'm addressing is a tendency sometimes because of socioeconomic and just conditions to devalue, not maybe even intentionally, but to kind of devalue the practice of Islam in these communities. And I'm here to say that my life experience as a Muslim has shown me that it's made the seerah literature come to life, for me even more when you see these people that who were just the dregs of Meccan or Medinian society, and Allah through Islam just elevates them to the highest of the high that human beings can attain in this world. And those jewels are found today in those communities that you just referenced. And because if we approach those communities like Tarzan going into the jungle to save the natives, then our presence is just going to be more of a hindrance as Muslims for the residents in these communities to even want to be Muslim, because they see how these folks being treated. Come on, man. Don't treat me like this. And so I think that um, we have to, as Muslims, value the life of every human being. Also, we have to recognize that the condition that so many people, not just in America, but specifically here in this country, and specifically, we're talking about people of African descent in this country, have a unique kind of encumbrances, things put in the way, obstacles put in the way. And you open talking about affirmative action, and as it relates to school, getting into colleges, but it's a horrendous, a hideous mindset, especially coming from Muslims. It sends chills down my back when I hear some of my Muslim brothers talk about, well, merit-based entrance into these Ivy League schools and things like that. I had the grades, they should have the grades too. Well, hell, they do have the grades, but they got something you may not have. They got black skin. And that alone oftentimes determines the level of ascension on the political, on the economic, on the social scale that people in this country can rise just based on the color of their skin. So I think that uh, there's a lot packed, and I'm sorry to get off if I did into tangent type points, but I think that it's tied together for me, that we have to value. It's just like searching for gold, right? Are you searching for something that you have to put a lot of effort into it to actually get to it? Those gold, the nuggets are found in these communities that sometimes we just dismiss. And folks who have had a connection to those kinds of communities, or have connection to people who have come from those communities, or have a genuine understanding of what Islam is to do for us as it relates to how we treat our fellow human beings. Uh, all of those folks in those categories can see the value. And what Mabel, the Muslim Alliance for Black Lives, is attempting to do is to kind of not kind of, but to refocus our attention in those areas. Uh, what Malcolm was referring to in the mid 1960s as being the most fertile ground for the dawah. That let's not overlook these communities while we, go after, as you say, low hanging fruit. Let's not overlook these communities. It may be more work because we have to, um, kind of educate ourselves before we run in there and all this other stuff. But the reward is tremendous.
No, I agree. I think that was I think that's a message that the Muslim community needs to hear. I think that's something that we need to remember. especially when we're deciding, when we're having these discussions about the future of our community, and when we're apportioning resources for our vision for the future. I feel like that segment of the community a lot of times just is not a priority for us. So that's why I think this discussion is important, because we're talking about how Islam in this country started, and talking about some of the greatest eras of Islamic revival in this country, and some of the most important Muslims in America, and not talking about those who are from other places and came here, but those who were uniquely American. And they, as you described, that Islam elevated them, and by that virtue, they were able to serve society. I think that's a good closeout message for us. Is there anything else you want to point out before we close this thing out for the week?
Yeah. I really appreciate the opportunity to reflect back on some of these past experiences, but not just in a reminiscing kind of way, but just to try to um, understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala putting me certain experiences for the dawah, I mean, for the uh, a capacity or potential to help uh, bring guide others to this way of life, and we have to be present to do that. We can't mail it in. We have to be present, and um, your understanding of certain social and historical dynamics at the age where you are now, to understand certain things now, and so have the certain practices and creative ability. It gleans well to me for the future of Islam in this country. We just have to, keep pumping certain kinds of things, not just we as individuals, but a certain kind of message needs to become more normalized in the Muslim community in this country. We've made it well. We've done really well in assimilating into U.S. mainstream life in the business world, financial world, and all of that. But I think we have lagged behind in one of the most important elements that the life of the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam has demonstrated for us. I mean, that's, you got to reach back and you got to help regardless of our status. The more Allah has given us, the more is required of us.
No doubt. I think that's a good take home message for us until next week.
So,
Inshallah. So with that, we can go ahead and close this thing out.
okay,
Assalamu
sounds
alaikum.
good. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.